things and get out of my house." My daughter-in-law said it to my face, calm as ice, while my son stood behind her and said nothing. I did not argue. I did not beg. I picked up the one bag I had left by the door. I had packed it the night before, because somewhere deep in my chest, I already knew this moment was coming. I walked out. And just as I reached the sidewalk, a black pickup truck pulled up in front of the house. The driver stepped out. My son's face went white. He had never seen that truck before. He had no idea who was behind the wheel. But I did. And I smiled for the first time in 8 months. My name is Robert Callahan. I am 67 years old. And 3 days ago, I closed a chapter of my life that I should have closed much sooner. This is not a story about bitterness. It is not a story about revenge, though I will admit there is a kind of quiet satisfaction in the ending. This is a story about what happens when a man spends his whole life giving everything he has to his family, and then one day finds himself treated like a stranger in his own son's home. And what happens after that? That part matters most. My wife Karen died on a Wednesday afternoon in November 2 years ago. She had been fighting lung cancer for 14 months. I was with her at the end, holding her hand in that hospital room with the bad fluorescent lighting and the sound of machines beeping down the hall. When she stopped breathing, I sat there for a long time without moving. I did not know what a person was supposed to do next. We had been married for 41 years. I had worked 38 of those years as a machinist at a manufacturing plant in Dayton, Ohio. I retired at 64 2 years before she got sick, with the idea that we would finally travel, finally rest, finally have the mornings to ourselves that we had always talked about. We got 14 months instead, then she was gone, and I was alone in the house we had lived in since 1989. My son Daniel was the one who suggested I move in with him. He called me on a Sunday, about 5 months after Karen passed. He said he and his wife Melissa had been talking, and they both agreed it made no sense for me to stay alone in that house in Dayton. He said they had the extra bedroom. He said I was getting older and should not be living by myself. He said, and I remember this clearly, the exact words, "Dad, your family. This is what family does." I believed him. I want to say that plainly so no one reading this judges me for what came next. I believed my son. Why would I not? He was 53 years old when he asked me that, and I had known him his entire life. I had driven him to baseball practice in the rain. I had sat in the waiting room when he had his appendix removed at age 22, the night his mother and I drove 4 hours to get to him because he was alone and scared. I had walked him down the aisle, stood beside him, cried when he cried. You believe a man you raised from nothing. You believe your own son. I sold the house in Dayton. It sold quickly, for more than I expected, and I walked away with $220,000. Daniel helped me with the paperwork. He was practical about it, efficient, the way he was about most things. When the money came through, I gave him $75,000. I told him it was for the house, for the inconvenience of adding another person to his household, for whatever they needed. He thanked me. He hugged me. He said I did not have to do that. I told him I wanted to. I kept the rest in savings, in an account I did not mention to anyone. I moved into the guest room at Daniel and Melissa's house in Westfield, Indiana on a Tuesday in March. The room was clean. It had a window that faced the backyard. On the first night, Daniel ordered pizza and we watched a basketball game together, and it felt, for a few hours, like something real, like I had a place again. That feeling lasted about 3 weeks. The first sign was small enough that I almost missed it. Melissa had a way of reorganizing things after I touched them. I would pour myself coffee and set the pot back on the burner, and within 5 minutes she would move it slightly, adjust it, straighten it in a way that communicated, without words, that I had done it wrong. I noticed, but I told myself I was being oversensitive. An older man moving into a young couple's home takes adjustment on both sides. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I gave her that benefit for a long time. By the second month, the rules had begun. They were not announced as rules. They arrived as suggestions, as gentle corrections, as offhand comments Melissa made in passing while she was doing other things, her voice light and casual, her eyes not quite meeting mine. Robert, it would probably be easier if you didn't use the kitchen before 9. I like to have that space to myself in the mornings. Robert, the thermostat. Daniel and I keep it at 68. If you're cold, there are extra blankets in the hall closet. Robert, when you have the TV on at night, the sound carries. Could you maybe use the headphones? I nodded to all of it. Of course, no problem. Whatever you need. I had spent 38 years on a factory floor learning how to adapt to conditions I did not choose. I could adapt to this, but the conditions kept changing. By the third month, my pension had become a topic of conversation. I received $1,900 a month from the plant's retirement fund, plus Social Security, which added another $1,400. Total, $3,300 every month, which I had always considered enough to live modestly and comfortably. Daniel came to me one evening while Melissa was out, and he sat across from me at the kitchen table with the look on his face he always got when he had prepared what he wanted to say in advance. He told me that expenses had gone up. He told me that my being in the house added costs, utilities, groceries, the general overhead of a third adult. He asked if I would be willing to contribute. I said of course. I asked how much. He said $2,000 a month would help considerably. $2,000 out of $3,300, leaving me with $1,300 for everything else, including my medications for blood pressure and the knee I had replaced 4 years earlier. I said yes. I transferred the money on the first of every month without complaint. Melissa said thank you once. After that, the money was simply expected. There's one afternoon I keep coming back to. It was a Saturday in June. Melissa's sister and brother-in-law had come to visit. They were there for a barbecue in the backyard. Steaks, cold drinks, the kind of easy afternoon I used to host myself in Dayton, back when Karen was alive and our yard was always full of people. I got dressed nicely. I put on the blue polo shirt that Daniel had given me for my birthday the previous year. I came downstairs ready to be part of it. Melissa was in the kitchen arranging a tray of appetizers. When she saw me come downstairs, something moved across her face very quickly, something she controlled before it settled into a smile. "Robert," she said, "we're keeping this kind of small today, just the four of us. You'd probably be more comfortable inside." I stood at the bottom of the stairs. I could see through the sliding glass door into the backyard, where 2 folding chairs were already set up around the fire pit, facing 2 other chairs. There were 4 beers in a cooler, 4 plates stacked on the outdoor table. She had planned it this way. The number 4 was not an accident. I said, of course. I went back upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed, and I listened to the sound of laughter from the yard below. And I thought about Karen, about the way she used to appear in a doorway with a dish towel over her shoulder and that look she had, that particular look that meant she was about to tell me something true. I thought about what she would say to me right now, sitting in this room that smelled of someone else's house. I thought for a long time. I did not come to any conclusions. That night, after Melissa's sister and brother-in-law left, Daniel knocked on my door. He came in and sat in the chair by the window, and I could tell he had been sent. There was something careful in the way he carried himself, the way a man looks when he has been coached. He said that Melissa had some concerns. He said she felt that having another adult in the house was creating friction. He used that word, friction, and I wondered who had chosen it. He said they both valued having me there, but they wanted to be honest with me, wanted to tell me up front. He said I was welcome, but I needed to understand that this was their home, and Melissa's comfort in her own home mattered. I asked him what that meant in practical terms. He said maybe it would be better if I stayed in my room in the evenings when they had guests. He said maybe it would be better if I ate at a different time, since the 3 of us eating together made the kitchen feel crowded. He said maybe I should think about finding some activities outside the house, a senior center or something to give myself. He paused here, searching structure. I looked at my son for a long moment. He was 53 years old. He was wearing a sweatshirt he had owned for years, one I recognized from the last time I visited him in Westfield, before all this. His hair was a little gray at the temples now. He looked tired. He did not look like a villain. He looked like a man who had let his wife make decisions he did not know how to undo. I told him I understood. I did not tell him that I had heard everything, that the walls of the guest room were thin enough to hear the whole conversation he and Melissa had had the night before, the one in which she said, and I am not forgetting these words, I didn't sign up to be a nursing service. He's your father, Daniel. You deal with it. I had lain in the dark for 2 hours after hearing that, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. The senior center was 3 miles away. I started going on Tuesdays and Thursdays, not because Daniel suggested it and not because I had nothing else to do, but because I needed somewhere to exist that was not that house. The center had a woodworking room, which I had not touched since my own garage back in Dayton. I started going in there on Tuesday mornings when it was mostly empty, and I discovered that my hands still remembered things my mind had half forgotten. The smell of sawdust, the feel of a plane moving with the grain, the particular satisfaction of a joint that fits the first time. There was a man named Gerald who used the woodworking room on Thursday afternoons. He was 72, a retired high school shop teacher, and he had been coming to the center for 6 years. We started talking the way men do in workshops, about the wood first, then the tools, then gradually everything else. Gerald had his own losses. His wife had left him 11 years before, not for someone else, just for a life she had decided she wanted more. His 2 daughters were in different states and called on holidays. He lived alone in a house he had paid off in 2019 and felt no apologies about it. I did not tell him about the situation at Daniel's house. Not at first. But Gerald had the particular quality of certain people who have been through difficulty without being destroyed by it, a steadiness that makes the space around him feel honest. One Thursday in July, something slipped. I was telling him about a mortise joint I'd gotten wrong, and somehow I ended up talking about the kitchen, about the evenings in my room, about Melissa's 4 beers and 4 chairs. I stopped in the middle of it, embarrassed. Gerald looked at what he was working on for a moment. Then he said, "A man should have a place where he can walk into a room without apologizing for it." We did not talk about it again that day, but I thought about that sentence for a long time. The moment that broke everything happened on a Thursday evening, in September. I had come home from the center later than usual. Gerald and I had stayed past closing to finish a small cabinet we were building together, a project we had been working on for 3 weeks. I was in a better mood than I had been in months. I came through the front door at 7:15, and Daniel and Melissa were in the kitchen, and both of them turned when I walked in with an expression I recognized instantly. They had been waiting. Melissa started. She said she needed to talk to me about something important. She said she had been doing some thinking, and she needed to be honest with me. She said things were not working. She said the arrangement had become a source of stress in their marriage, and she needed me to understand that their marriage had to come first. Daniel stood behind her without speaking. I asked what she was suggesting. She said there were very good assisted living facilities in the area. She had actually looked into a few. She printed out information. She slid a piece of paper across the counter to me, and I looked down at it, and it was a brochure for a place called Meadow Ridge, with a photograph of a lobby with soft lighting and a woman in scrubs smiling at an elderly man in a chair. She said the monthly cost was covered by my pension and Social Security combined, which she had apparently calculated. She said they would help me with the move. She said she thought this would be better for everyone, including me, because I would have more people my age to spend time with. I looked at the brochure. I looked at my son. He was still standing in the same place, and I waited for him to say something, anything, to contradict her, to push back, to be my son. He looked at the counter. I picked up the brochure. I set it back down on the counter. I said I needed to think about it. I went to my room. I did not sleep that night either, but this time I was not paralyzed. This time something had settled inside me, the way a joint settles when the glue dries, when the piece is finally what it is supposed to be. I thought about Karen, and about the way she had always been the one to say the thing that needed saying in this family. I thought about Gerald and what he had said about walking into a room. I thought about the $75,000 I had given Daniel, and the $2,000 a month since March, and the 38 years in that factory, and the long drives to baseball practice in the rain, and the 4-hour drive to the hospital when my son was 22 and scared and alone. I thought about the money in the savings account no one knew about. I was up before 5. I made no noise. I packed my bag carefully, not in panic, not in grief, but deliberately, the way a man packs who knows exactly where he is going. In the morning I came downstairs. Melissa was in the kitchen. Daniel was getting ready for work. I told them I'd thought it over, and they were right. It was time for a change. Melissa looked relieved in a way she could not entirely conceal. I told them I would be out by noon. I watched Daniel's face move through several expressions. Surprise, then something that might have been guilt. Then the settling of relief that he would not have to make a harder choice. He asked if I was sure. I said I was very sure. I called Gerald at 7:30. He answered on the second ring. I told him what had happened. I told him all of it, the whole 8 months, the way I had not allowed myself to tell anyone before. When I finished, there was a short silence. Then Gerald said, "I've got a finished basement that's been empty for 2 years. It's got its own entrance off the back, has a bathroom, a sitting area, a window that faces the east so you get morning light." I said I could not ask him to do that. He said I had not asked. He was offering. I said I would pay him rent. He said I would pay him rent. He said we would figure out something fair, but that was not the point. And I knew it. I said I would be there by noon. I had my bag in my hand when I walked out the front door of Daniel's house. Melissa was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, watching me go. Daniel had already left for work. I crossed the yard to the sidewalk, and then I heard the sound of Gerald's truck pulling up to the curb, that black pickup, the one with the dent in the passenger door from a parking lot in 2018, the one that meant more to me in that moment than anything I had ever owned. Gerald got out and walked around to help with my bag without being asked, the way a man does when he has been a friend to people his whole life. I heard Melissa call my name from the doorway. I looked back once. I looked at the house that had never been mine. Then I turned around, and Gerald held the door of the truck open, and I got in. We drove to his house in Greenfield, 20 minutes east, while the morning was still bright and new. The basement apartment was exactly as he described. Clean, quiet, with a workbench along one wall that Gerald had built himself 20 years ago. The window did face east. The first morning I woke up there, the light came in at an angle across the workbench, and I lay in the bed looking at it for a while, just looking at it, feeling the strange lightness of waking up in a place where no one resented you for breathing. Gerald made coffee every morning. We drank it standing in his kitchen, looking out the window at the yard, talking about whatever came. Some mornings we did not talk at all, and that was fine too. He had a dog, a mutt named Herschel, who decided on the second day that I was acceptable and took to sleeping on my feet while I sat at the workbench in the evenings. Daniel called 7 times in the first 4 days. I let the calls go. On the 5th day, I answered. He said he had not expected me to actually leave. He said Melissa was... He paused. She was processing. He said he was sorry. He said he did not know how things had gotten to that point. His voice was smaller than I had heard it in years. The voice he used when he was young and had done something he knew was wrong and could not pretend otherwise. I said I appreciated the apology. I told him I was somewhere safe, with someone I trusted. I told him that when I was ready, we could talk more. Then I told him one thing I had decided. I was going to say, calmly and without anger, before we ended the call. I told him that the $2,000 a month would no longer be coming. I told him that the $75,000 I had given him up front would stay with him, because I had given it freely and I was not a man who took back what he gave. But the monthly transfer was finished. I told him to let Melissa know. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he understood. I found out later, through his cousin Mark, who called me 2 months after to check in, that Daniel and Melissa had been planning a trip to Portugal that fall. They had already paid a deposit. When the $2,000 stopped coming in October, the trip was canceled. Melissa was, according to Mark, not pleased. I will tell you honestly that I did not feel bad about that. What I felt was something quieter. I felt the particular satisfaction of a man who has learned, a little late but not too late, that his own comfort and dignity are not things to be negotiated away in exchange for a place to sleep. I felt the satisfaction of a man who knows what his contribution was worth. Not because someone told him, but because they revealed it by losing it. Gerald and I finished the cabinet in November. We gave it to the senior center for the woodworking room. The director there A woman named Patrice, who had known Gerald for years, put a small card on it that said "Built by Robert and Gerald, 2024. I stood there and looked at that card for longer than was probably necessary. But it had been a long time since I saw my name on something I had made. The spring following, I started teaching a beginner woodworking class at the center on Saturday mornings. 6 students, mostly men and women in their 60s and 70s, all of them learning to use their hands again after years of other lives. One of them, a man named Phil, told me on the 3rd Saturday that he had not made anything with his hands since he built a birdhouse with his father in 1973. He had tears in his eyes when the first joint held. I told him that feeling did not go away. He said he was starting to believe me. Daniel came to visit in late February. I had told him he was welcome when he was ready to come, not because he felt he had to, and this time I could hear in his voice that he meant it. He drove out to Greenfield on a Sunday. Gerald made himself scarce, the way Gerald always does when something needs to be private. We sat in the kitchen and drank coffee and talked for 2 hours. Daniel cried, not dramatically, just the way a man cries when he has been carrying something heavy for a long time and finally sets it down. He said he had stood in that kitchen and said nothing while his wife handed me a brochure for a nursing home, and he had known in that moment what he was doing. And he had done it anyway, and he had not forgiven himself for that. I told him that I was not going to tell him that it was nothing, because it was not nothing. I told him that what a person did in the hardest moment was the thing that said the most about them. But I also told him that I knew who he was before that moment, and I was willing to believe he knew better now. He asked if he could come back. I said yes. I said bring the kids next time. His daughter Emma was 8, and his son Carter was 11. And I had not seen them since March. He said he would. Before he left, he stood at the door for a moment and looked around at the room, at the workbench, at the tools hanging on the pegboard Gerald had helped me put up, at Herschel asleep in the corner, at the morning light coming through the east window. He said, "You look better than I've seen you in years." I said I felt better than I had in years. He nodded. He left. I stood in the doorway and watched his car until it was gone, and I thought about Karen again, the way I still do most mornings. I thought about something she used to say when one of us was carrying something we should have let go of sooner. She would put her hand on my arm and say, "Robert, you don't have to stay somewhere that doesn't want you. The world is bigger than the worst room you've ever been in." She was right. She was usually right. I just needed some time to understand it without her. I am 67 years old. I wake up every morning to light coming in a window that I chose. I drink coffee with a man who means what he says. I teach people how to build things that last. I have a son who is learning, slowly, what it means to be worth trusting again. I have 2 grandchildren. I plan to take fishing in the summer. I gave my whole life to a family, and for a while, the cost of that felt like it had erased me, like I had worked myself down to nothing and then been told that nothing wasn't enough. But here's what I have come to understand. A man is not the room they put him in. He is not the number they put next to his name on a spreadsheet. He is not the inconvenience they see when they look at him. He is the sum of everything he built and everyone he loved, and every morning he got up and tried again. That cannot be taken from you. Not by a brochure on a kitchen counter, not by a son who stood in the wrong place at the wrong moment, not by anyone. The best answer to people who counted your cost and found you too expensive is not to argue the math. It is to walk out the door, get in the truck, and go build something worth keeping. That is what I did, and if that story means something to you, if you have ever sat in a room that was supposed to be your home and felt like a stranger in it, leave me a comment. Tell me where you're watching from, because you are not alone in this. And it is never, not once, too late to walk out the door.